Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak quietly gave away $10 million of his own stock to reward early Apple employees who had been left out of the company's riches. In 1980, when Apple went public, some of the garage team that built Apple didn't receive stock options, a decision largely made by Steve Jobs. Wozniak felt this was unfair, so he created the Woz plan, personally offering chunks of his shares at a nominal price to around 80 Apple staff who had missed out. Those employees suddenly benefited from Apple's IPO boom thanks to Woz's generosity. He did it simply because it was the right thing. This act of kindness was virtually unheard of in Silicon Valley, where founders rarely give up their own equity. But Wozniak valued the contributions of everyone who helped build Apple's success, and he literally shared the wealth with them. As Wozniak said, "I gave about $10 million of my own stock to them because it was the right thing." If you've been here before, drop a hashtag believe in the comments below so I can feature you here in a future video. And if you're new, welcome to Believe Nation, the only channel that helps you believe in yourself daily, one video at a time. Believe. Why some early Apple employees were left out. When Apple had its initial public offering in December 1980, not everyone who helped build the company was rewarded. Steve Jobs and Apple's board decided that only certain employees qualified for stock options. Many early team members, the folks who had worked with Jobs and Wozniak in the garage, ended up with nothing. A prime example was Daniel Kottke, one of Apple's first employees and a close college friend of Jobs. Despite Kottke's contributions, he helped build and test Apple's first computers. Jobs did not consider him worthy of stock. Kottke later recalled how he tried to talk to Jobs about it, but was repeatedly ignored. At one point, another Apple executive even offered to give Kottke some of his own shares if Jobs would match the gesture. Jobs' response was ice cold. "Okay, I will give him zero." This meant Jobs refused to give Kottke any stock at all. For dedicated early employees like Kottke, who had put their heart and soul in Apple, being shut out of the IPO riches felt like a betrayal. Jobs' hardline stance left a number of loyal Apple employees disappointed and demoralized. They had worked tirelessly to build Apple's products and culture, only to see others get wealthy overnight while Apple's stock skyrocketed. Apple's IPO was a huge success. It made Steve Jobs and other executives extremely rich. But people like Kottke, Bill Fernandez, who was Apple's very first employee, Chris Espinosa, another early Apple employee, and others received no stock and thus no share of the wealth. This situation didn't sit right with Apple's other co-founder, Steve Wozniak. Wozniak believed it was wrong to leave out members of the team who had contributed during Apple's startup years. He saw it as unfair that only a select few would benefit financially, while many early contributors were left empty-handed. The Woz plan. Wozniak shares the wealth. Wozniak decided to fix this inequity himself. In an extraordinary move, he came up with what became known as the Woz plan. Under this plan, Wozniak personally offered some of his own shares to the early Apple employees who had been denied stock options. He did this quietly and without a ton of fanfare. It was a personal mission for him to do the right thing, not a public stunt. In early 1981, shortly after Apple went public, Wozniak allowed around 40 to 80 of these early employees to purchase a chunk of his own Apple stock at a nominal price of just $5 per share. Each of those staff members was allowed to buy up to 2,000 shares from Wozniak at this dirt cheap price. At the time, Apple's IPO price had been around $22 per share on the open market. So Wozniak was essentially giving them a massive discount. In practical terms, Woz was reaching into his own pocket to gift approximately $10 million worth of stock to his colleagues. This was stock he could have sold for a fortune, but instead he chose to share it with those who had helped build the company. Those early Apple employees who participated in the Woz plan suddenly found themselves holding valuable stock that could change their lives. Thanks to Wozniak's generosity, people like Kottke, Fernandez, Espinosa, Randy Wigington, another early Apple engineer, and others finally got to share in Apple's success. Many of them purchased the shares from Wozniak at $5 each, and immediately those shares were worth several times more on the market. As Apple grew over the years, the value of those stocks exploded. In fact, Apple stock split multiple times, and by 2021, a single Apple share from 1980 had split into 224 shares and would be worth tens of thousands of dollars. In other words, Wozniak's gift of stock made a huge financial impact on the lives of the roughly 80 people he helped. Some of these people who had been left out of the IPO suddenly became wealthy, or at least far better off than before, all because Wozniak decided to share his wealth. Wozniak carried out the Woz plan very quietly. He didn't seek any publicity or praise for it at the time. In fact, many people didn't even know this happened until years later when the story eventually came to light. Even Hollywood missed the memo. In the 2015 film Steve Jobs and other dramatizations of Apple's history, this remarkable act of generosity wasn't shown. Wozniak himself noted that he was surprised the filmmakers chose not to include his $10 million stock giveaway. But Woz never did it for the recognition. He did it because he felt it was the right thing to do. Also, if you want to take real action after this video, I made a free worksheet just for you. It covers the top lessons from today, gives you space to write your biggest takeaways, and helps you build a simple action plan. It's 100% free. Just click the link in the description below to go grab it. I'll see you there. Why Wozniak did it. It was the right thing. What drove Steve Wozniak to give away such a large chunk of his personal stake in Apple? In simple terms, Wozniak did it out of a sense of fairness, loyalty, and gratitude. He later explained his reasoning in interviews, shedding light on his values. Wozniak remembered that in Apple's early days, there were only about 5 people who ran the company for the first 3 years. And as a result, those few people held almost all the stocks. When Apple went public and the stock's value skyrocketed, Woz felt deeply uncomfortable that only this small group would get rich, while dozens of other employees who had been with them from the garage days would get nothing. Everybody who'd been around and helped Apple in the beginning was a part of its success in Wozniak's view, and they deserved to share in that success. It's important to note Wozniak's background. He came from Hewlett-Packard, where he had worked before co-founding Apple. At HP, there was a tradition of profit sharing and employee stock ownership. Wozniak recalled that HP would distribute a portion of profits to employees and even give out stock so that employees felt like owners of the company. And this had a big influence on him. Wozniak strongly believed that a company's employees should feel ownership and should be rewarded when the company does well. To him, this was just basic fairness and good practice. He once said that he felt this so strongly that when Apple's IPO happened, he simply didn't feel right keeping all the rewards confined to the founders. Wozniak wanted to spread the wealth to those who had worked hard alongside him. So, acting on his belief, Wozniak gave away a lot of his stock to almost everybody in the company in marketing and engineering jobs, essentially to the people who had helped build Apple's products and growth. He didn't stop there. Woz also gave large amount of shares to a few key young people who weren't official employees but had been crucial in Apple's early days. Some of these were local kids or high school students who had hung around Apple and contributed, for example, by writing code or offering technical help when Apple was just starting out. Wozniak said these young enthusiasts helped inspire him and even wrote software with him in the early days. I wouldn't have gotten to where I got to without them, Wozniak admitted, emphasizing that those contributors deserve to own a part of Apple too. And this speaks volumes about Wozniak's character. He genuinely valued every contribution, no matter how big or small, and he never saw Apple's success as solely his own. To Woz, Apple's achievements were a team effort, and so the rewards should be shared with the team. He has often said that giving those employees a share of the company was simply the fair and right thing to do. A virtually unheard of act of kindness in Silicon Valley. Wozniak's $10 million giveaway stands out as an extraordinary act of kindness, especially in Silicon Valley's competitive culture. In the world of tech startups, founders almost never give up their personal equity voluntarily. Founders and early investors usually hold on to as many shares as possible, since those shares translate into wealth and control. The norm is to reward employees with stock only through formal stock option plans or bonuses, and often only key employees get significant shares. What Wozniak did, personally sacrificing a portion of his own stake to thank early employees, was virtually unheard of at the time. It broke the Silicon Valley mold. Wozniak received no pressure to do this from anyone. Apple's board certainly didn't ask him to do it. In fact, the board had decided against giving those employees shares. No, this was purely Wozniak's initiative, driven by his generous heart. And to put it in perspective, imagine another famous tech founder like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg handing over 10 million of their own shares to early employees just because they felt it was fair. It's hard to picture, right? That's one reason Steve Wozniak is so respected and beloved in the tech community. He prioritized people over profit. While Steve Jobs was known for his intense focus on products and sometimes ruthless business decisions, Wozniak was known for his warmth and generosity. Woz once said that making Apple successful was not just about technology or money for him, it was about the people who built the company together. He believed in loyalty and doing good by those who were loyal to Apple. Wozniak's act of sharing the wealth had a lasting impact on Apple's culture as well. It sent a message that everyone's contributions mattered. Early Apple employee Randy Wigington once noted that Wozniak cared deeply about the well-being of the team and never acted as if he was above anyone else. By giving away part of his fortune to his colleagues, Wozniak essentially said, "We did this together, so we should all benefit." This fostered a sense of family and loyalty within the early Apple team. Many of those who benefited from the Woz plan remain grateful to Wozniak for life. Decades later, Steve Wozniak is still often described as the heart of Apple's founding story, the kind, principled engineer who valued people as much as products. It's also telling that Wozniak never regretted giving up that $10 million in stock. By today's value, those shares would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars or more. But for Woz, it was never about the money. He famously said, "I didn't ever want to be rich." And even after Apple's success, he lived relatively modestly and focused on engineering and teaching rather than accumulating more wealth. Wozniak eventually left day-to-day operations at Apple in 1985, but he remained remained an employee in a symbolic capacity and continued to inspire Apple's culture of creativity and friendliness. His generous spirit carried on in various philanthropic efforts. For example, Wozniak has donated a lot to education and even funded technology programs in schools. Sharing and helping others is just part of who he is. The legacy of Wozniak's generosity. Steve Wozniak's decision to share $10 million of his own stock with early Apple employees is far more than just a footnote in tech history. It's a powerful lesson in leadership, in fairness, and humility. In doing so, Wozniak showed that true success isn't just about personal gain. It's about lifting others up with you. His generosity ensured that the people who labored in Apple's early days, when success was far from guaranteed, were not forgotten when the company hit it big. This act of kindness has become a legendary story, illustrating that doing the right thing often matters more in the long run than any extra money or credit you might keep for yourself. The Woz Plan story is a reminder that empathy and fairness can exist even in the business world. When you recognize and reward the contributions of others, you cultivate trust, loyalty, and a sense of shared purpose. These qualities can be far more valuable than money alone. As the saying goes, success means little if you don't lift others up along the way. Steve Wozniak lifted others up in a very tangible way. He didn't have to. He gained nothing material by doing it, but he did it because it was right. In a world where we often hear about fierce competition and self-interest, Wozniak's story shows that kindness and business success are not mutually exclusive. You can be incredibly successful and still stay true to your values and treat people with generosity and respect. Wozniak once summed up his actions simply by saying he did it because it was the right thing to do. And that single quote encapsulates his philosophy. He believed doing good for others is success in itself. So think about how you can apply this principle in your own life or business. How can you share your wealth, knowledge, or success with those around you? Remember, when you help others rise, you rise too, in character, in reputation, and in the fulfillment that comes from knowing you made a difference. Steve Wozniak's quiet $10 million gift continues to inspire generations of entrepreneurs to build companies with heart and to lead with generosity. And congratulations, you're one video closer to who you're meant to be. Believe. To learn the 6 habits that made Steve Jobs an unstoppable entrepreneur, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there. Habits make or break you as an entrepreneur. Too many brilliant people never reach their potential because they never build the habits to match their ambition. If you ignore this, you'll keep struggling and start to wonder if you were ever meant to be an entrepreneur at all.